The chamber was built for unity. At least, that was the idea. A circular hall suspended in the cold vacuum between systems, anchored to no star and owned by no single species. 17 civilizations had agreed to meet here, to speak here, to resolve conflict without bloodshed. Most days, they even believed it. Today, no one did. The silence inside the chamber was wrong. Not the usual quiet of diplomacy, measured, patient, controlled, but something heavier. Something waiting. Conversations had died mid-sentence. Movements had slowed. Even the automated translation hum seemed quieter, as if the station itself understood that something irreversible had already begun. At the far edge of the chamber, behind a curved obsidian desk marked with a simple blue insignia, the human delegation sat in stillness. Ambassador Yoel Okafor did not move. Her hands rested flat against the surface in front of her. Her posture was perfect, deliberate, practiced over decades of negotiations with species that interpreted the smallest twitch as weakness. Her face revealed nothing. But her eyes. Her eyes were fixed on the central podium. Archon Verith of the VT Kai stood there, tall and composed, his scaled form catching the chamber light in dark green reflections that bordered on black. His crest was raised high, a clear biological signal of satisfaction among his kind. He was enjoying this. The vessels entered restricted space, Verith continued. His voice translated into a smooth, emotionless tone that carried effortlessly across the chamber. They were warned. The warning was ignored. The response was lawful under VT Kai territorial doctrine. A pause. Then, with subtle emphasis, lawful. The word lingered. It settled into the chamber like something sharp. No one interrupted him. No one challenged him. 17 species sat in their designated sections, each behind their respective desks, each representing civilizations that spanned thousands, some tens of thousands, of years. And not one of them spoke. Some avoided looking toward the human delegation entirely. Others watched with quiet interest. A few, less careful, displayed something closer to amusement. Because the truth, the unspoken, universally understood truth, was simple. Humans were new, young, unproven, still learning where they stood in a galaxy ruled by older, harder powers. And today, they had made a mistake. A fatal one. Verith let the silence stretch, then inclined his head slightly, as if concluding a routine matter of governance. The compact exists to maintain order, he said. Order requires that boundaries be respected, especially by species still finding their place among established powers. There it was. Not just justification. A message. A reminder. A warning, to everyone watching. A low ripple passed through parts of the chamber. Not quite laughter, but close enough that the meaning carried. Still, the human table did not react. Ambassador Okafor remained perfectly still. No visible anger. No protest. No defense. Nothing. And that, more than anything else, began to feel unsettling. Because those who had dealt with humans before, truly dealt with them, beyond trade agreements and surface diplomacy, knew one thing. Humans were rarely this quiet without reason. Across the chamber, in a transparent enclosure designed for environmental isolation, an ancient observer shifted slightly. Elder Soen had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations long before humanity had achieved orbit. They had seen patterns repeat. Mistakes echo. Arrogance bloom and collapse. And as their many eyes moved from the proud figure at the podium to the silent human ambassador who had yet to speak, a faint, unfamiliar sensation settled into their awareness. Not curiosity. Not concern. Something colder. Something older. Something they had not felt in a very long time. Unease. The footage began without warning. No formal introduction. No request for permission. It simply appeared, projected into the center of the chamber, expanding outward in a perfect sphere of light until it dominated the space between all 17 delegations. Several species shifted in irritation at the breach of protocol. Then the audio activated. And no one spoke again. The scene was unmistakably human. A ship interior, clean lines, utilitarian design, soft white lighting along the walls. The kind of vessel built for long-range exploration, not combat. A survey craft. Civilian grade, lightly shielded at best. Harmless. 12 figures stood in a line. Human. Unarmed. Their hands restrained behind their backs with magnetic binds. Their uniforms were worn, scorched in places, but intact enough to show rank insignias, mission patches, identification tags. Crew. Not soldiers. One of them, young, barely more than a teenager by human standards, shifted slightly, glancing sideways toward the others. Another, older, stood rigid, jaw tight, eyes forward. No one begged. No one spoke. They all understood. The camera angle shifted. Now the VT Kai were visible. Tall. Armored. Weapons already raised. Efficient. Prepared. Routine. This recording, Veritha's voice said calmly over the playback, serves as official documentation of a lawful enforcement action under VT Kai Territorial Code. A pause. Let it stand as clarification. The first shot was clean. A sharp burst of energy, precise, controlled. The human at the far left dropped instantly. No dramatics. No lingering. Just absence. The chamber did not react. Not outwardly. But something changed. Subtle. Almost invisible. A tightening. A shift in attention. The second shot followed immediately. Then the third. Measured. Systematic. Deliberate. One of the human crew closed her eyes just before her turn. Not in panic. Not in fear. But in something quieter. Acceptance. The execution continued. No hesitation. No deviation. 12 shots. 12 bodies. 12 lives ended in less than 30 seconds. The footage did not cut away. It lingered. Just long enough. Then it ended. The projection dissolved. The chamber returned. But the silence that followed was no longer diplomatic. It was heavy, pressed down on every surface, settled into every space between words that were not being spoken. Verith did not rush to fill it. He allowed it to sit. Allowed it to be felt. Because this was the point. Boundaries, he said at last, his tone unchanged, are not theoretical. His crest lifted slightly. Misunderstanding them has consequences. Across the chamber, a delegate from a minor trade coalition shifted uncomfortably. Another leaned toward an aide, whispering something too quiet to translate. Several species deliberately looked away from the human table. Not out of respect. Out of calculation. Because getting involved meant risk. And the galaxy had long since learned that risk was rarely worth taking, for anyone else. The Compact, Verith continued, is not obligated to protect those who fail to respect the established order. A subtle glance toward the human delegation. Nor should it be expected to intervene in matters that are clearly defined under lawful territorial doctrine. There it was. The real message. Not just to humanity. To everyone. Stay in your place. Or this is what happens. No one objected. No one challenged the interpretation. No one called for inquiry, or review, or restraint. 17 species. And not one voice rose. At the human table. Still nothing. Ambassador Okafor had not moved. Not during the footage. Not after. Not when the first shot fired. Not when the last body fell. Her hands remained exactly where they had been. Flat against the table. Steady. Controlled. Only her eyes had changed. Where before there had been stillness. Now there was focus. Sharp. Precise. Absolute. She looked not at the chamber. Not at the other delegates. Not even at the empty space where the projection had been. She looked directly at Archon Verith. And for the first time since the session began, something in the room shifted. Not visibly. Not audibly. But unmistakably. Because there was something in that gaze. Something that did not match the expectations placed upon a young species. Something that did not align with defeat. Or outrage. Or fear. It was something else. Something colder. Across the chamber, inside the glass enclosure, Elder Sohan noticed it immediately. They leaned forward, Just slightly. Enough to focus. Enough to study. Because in all their long existence, they had seen that look before. Not often. Not recently. But enough times to recognize it when it appeared. It was the look of a species that had just finished asking for permission. And had received its answer. And would not be asking again. For a moment after the footage ended, the chamber remained suspended in silence. Not respectful. Not shocked. Just waiting. Then, slowly, the first reaction came. A soft clicking sound from the right side of the chamber. One of the avian species, their beaks tapping together in what translated loosely as mild amusement. It spread. A low ripple. Not loud enough to be called laughter, but close enough that the meaning carried. Well, one delegate said, their translator lagging slightly behind the natural cadence of their speech, that was decisive. Another voice followed. Efficient. A third, less subtle. Educational. A few species did not react at all. They simply returned their attention to their consoles, as if the matter had already been concluded. Filed. Resolved. Irrelevant. The chamber began to move again. Conversations resumed in low tones. Data feeds flickered to life. A trade representative at the far end quietly requested clarification on a mining corridor dispute, as if 12 executions had been nothing more than a procedural delay. Business continued. At the central podium, Archon Verith allowed the atmosphere to settle into this new normal before speaking again. This matter, he said, should now be considered closed. His gaze swept across the chamber. Confident. Unchallenged. Certain. No further clarification is required, he continued. And no further discussion is necessary. No one disagreed. The moderator, a blue-skinned being named Perth, shifted slightly in their seat. Their expression, if it could be called that, suggested discomfort, but not enough to act on it. They hesitated. Just for a second. Then, the council acknowledges the Archon statement, Perth said carefully. If there are no formal objections. There aren't. The interruption came quickly. Sharp. Casual. From a delegation that had not even bothered to stand. Territorial enforcement falls within sovereign authority, another added. Precedent supports this. A third voice. The compact cannot involve itself in every border incident involving inexperienced species. The word lingered. Inexperienced. A few heads turned, subtly, toward the human table. Still no reaction. Ambassador Okafor remained seated. Still. Silent. Unmoving. And that silence, that complete lack of response, began to shift the tone again. Because this was the moment where something was expected. Anger. Protest. An appeal. Something. That was how these situations usually unfolded. A weaker party would object. Demand justice. Argue. Raise their voice. Give the chamber something to respond to. But the humans were doing none of that. Across the chamber, a delegate leaned toward another and spoke quietly. Do they not understand what just happened? They understand, came the reply. They simply lack the leverage to do anything about it. A pause. Then, quieter. They'll learn. Another ripple of muted amusement. At the podium, Veritha's crest lifted slightly higher. He had expected resistance. Some display. Some attempt at salvaging dignity. Instead, he had been given silence. And in his experience, silence from a weaker species was not restraint. It was submission. Let this serve, Verith said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber, as a reminder to all emerging civilizations. His gaze drifted, deliberately, back toward the human delegation. The galaxy is not governed by intent. A pause. It is governed by consequence. There it was again. Not just a statement. A message. A line drawn. Several delegates signaled agreement through their species-specific gestures. Subtle movements, color shifts, faint tones. Consensus. Unspoken. This was acceptable. This was order. This was how things worked. At the far end of the chamber, Elder Sowen watched it all unfold without interruption. Their many eyes moved slowly from speaker to speaker, tracking reactions, measuring responses, cataloging behavior. Patterns. Always patterns. And this one was familiar. A dominant power asserting control. A collective choosing convenience over principle. A smaller force being dismissed. It had happened before. Countless times. And almost always. It ended the same way. But something here was different. Sowen's attention shifted again. Back to the human table. Back to the ambassador who had not yet spoken a single word. Still seated. Still composed. Still unmoved. That was wrong. Not morally. Not politically. Statistically. Because every model, every historical pattern, every predictive structure Sowen had ever observed suggested that this was the point of escalation. And yet, there was none. Only silence. Across the chamber, one of the younger species finally spoke, their tone carrying a hint of curiosity beneath the formal structure of their words. Does the human delegation wish to respond? All eyes shifted. Finally. Now. This was it. The expected moment. The chamber stilled again. But this time, the silence felt different. Anticipatory. Waiting for a reaction that would confirm everything they believed about humanity. That they were emotional. Reactive. Predictable. That they would protest. That they would lose control. That they would prove. In front of everyone. Exactly where they stood. Ambassador Okafor did not respond immediately. She did not rush. Did not move out of sequence. Did not give them the satisfaction of urgency. Instead, she placed one hand lightly against the table. And stood. No sudden motion. No dramatic gesture. Just deliberate movement. And somehow, that was enough. The low murmurs stopped. The shifting quieted. Even those who had already dismissed the situation found themselves looking back. Because something about the way she stood. The precision. The control. The absolute absence of hesitation. Did not match the narrative. At the podium, Verith turned fully to face her. His crest lowered slightly. Not in submission. But in attention. He was not used to being interrupted. And he was not used to being looked at like that. Because Ambassador Okafor did not lower her gaze. She met his directly. No anger. No visible grief. No plea. Just focus. And in that moment, something subtle shifted again. Not in the chamber. In the balance. Because for the first time since the session began, it did not feel like a weaker species preparing to speak. It felt like something else entirely. Something that had been silent. Not because it had nothing to say, but because it had already decided exactly what would happen next. Ambassador Okafor did not ask for recognition. She did not wait for the moderator. She did not follow procedure. She simply stood and spoke. Archon Verith is finished. The interruption landed cleanly. No raised voice. No force behind it. And yet, it cut through the chamber more effectively than any shout could have. For a fraction of a second. No one reacted. Then, Ambassador, Perth began, their tone cautious, uncertain. The floor is no longer his, Okafor said. Still calm. Still even. Still controlled. The moderator hesitated. Looked toward Verith. Looked toward the chamber. Looked for support. None came. Because something had changed. Again. Verith straightened slightly at the podium, his crest rising in restrained irritation. You are out of order, he said. Yes, Okafor replied. No denial. No apology. Just acknowledgement. Another pause. And then, without waiting for permission, she continued. There were 12, she said. No context. No explanation. Just a number. It hung in the air. Then she spoke again. One was named Elias Venn. A flicker passed through the chamber. Small. Subtle. But noticeable. Navigator, she continued. 22 standard years of service. Born on New Carthage. He had a sister. Younger. He sent her a message before every deployment. Silence. Second, she said. Lena Korsch. Systems engineer. First deep space assignment. She requested this mission. No emotion. No emphasis. Just facts. Third, Mateo Alvarez. Environmental specialist. 48 years old. 2 children. 1 grandchild. The chamber did not move. Did not breathe. She continued. All 12. One by one. Name. Role. Life. Each one placed into the room with the same calm precision as the shots that had ended them. No accusation. No demand. No raised voice. Just recognition. And with every name, the atmosphere shifted. Because this was not how these things were usually done. This was not negotiation. Not argument. Not diplomacy. This was something else. Something quieter. Something heavier. When she finished, there was no immediate follow-up. No transition. No explanation. Just silence. Even Verith did not interrupt. Because for reasons he could not fully articulate. Interrupting now felt incorrect. After a moment, Okafor spoke again. The United Earth Directorate formally requests the immediate return of all surviving crew members currently held under VT Kai custody. Her tone did not change. We request the formation of a compact tribunal within 30 standard days to review the actions taken under the claim of territorial enforcement. Procedure. Structure. Perfectly delivered. As if nothing had happened. As if 12 lives had not just been named into existence, and then erased, in front of the entire council. Another pause. Then, she looked directly at Verith. Not past him. Not through him. At him. I have one additional statement. The chamber tightened. Something instinctive. Something unspoken. Because everyone in the room, whether they realized it or not, understood. This was the moment. And she did not raise her voice. Did not lean forward. Did not gesture. She simply said, "You should have asked." A breath. What happened the last time a species did this to us? Silence. Absolute. No movement. No sound. Even the translation system seemed slower. As if the words themselves resisted being processed. Because they did not arrive as a threat. There was no anger in them. No edge. No attempt to intimidate. They were delivered. Like information. Like a fact. Like something that had already happened. And could not be changed. Across the chamber. A delegate shifted. Another leaned back slightly. One of the older species went completely still. Because there was something deeply wrong with the tone. Not aggressive. Certain. At the podium, Veritha's crest lowered. Then rose again. A reflex. Control reasserting itself. Is that a threat? He asked. There it was. The expected framing. The comfortable interpretation. Something he could respond to. Dismiss. Categorize. Okafor did not answer immediately. She held his gaze. Long enough. That it became uncomfortable. Then, quietly, "You are welcome to look it up." No elaboration. No clarification. Nothing else. She gathered her materials. Simple movements. Organized. Unhurried. She inclined her head slightly toward the moderator. Then turned. And walked out. No dramatic exit. No final glance. No pause at the door. Just gone. The chamber remained frozen for a full second after she left. Then, sound returned all at once. Voices overlapping. Multiple languages colliding. Questions. Dismissals. Speculation. Posturing. Psychological tactic. An empty threat. Humans lack the capacity. Historical exaggeration. Emotional response. Nothing to substantiate. At the center of it, Verith stood unmoved. His crest rose again. Higher this time. Confidence restored. Control regained. He turned back toward his seat with the slow, deliberate ease of someone who had just witnessed a failed attempt at intimidation. Because in his understanding, that was all it had been. A last effort. A desperate line. Nothing more. Across the chamber, delegates were already shifting focus. Returning to schedules. Adjusting agendas. Moving on. Because that was what the compact did. It absorbed tension. Redirected conflict. Maintained balance. And whatever that had been, it did not change the balance. Not really. Not yet. But at the far end of the chamber, inside the transparent enclosure, Elder Sowen had not moved. Not once. Not during the speech. Not during the warning. Not during the exit. Their many eyes remained fixed. Not on Verith. Not on the chamber. But on the door, through which the human ambassador had just disappeared. And slowly, very slowly, one thin limb extended toward a private terminal. Because there was only one part of that exchange that mattered. Not the request. Not the procedure. Not even the warning itself. But the way it had been delivered. Calm. Certain. As if the outcome was already decided. And for the first time in a very long time, Elder Sowen felt something they did not like. Something they had learned to trust. Something that had kept them alive across the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Instinct. And that instinct was telling them, very clearly, that someone in this chamber had just made a mistake. They did not yet understand. Elder Sowen did not join the noise. They did not participate in the overlapping conversations, the dismissals, the quiet reframing of events into something manageable, something explainable. They had lived too long for that. Instead, they watched. They watched Archon Verith return to his seat, posture relaxed, crest high once more. They watched the delegates resume discussion as if the moment had already passed. They watched the chamber correct itself. Stabilize. Normalize. And they ignored all of it. Because the only thing that mattered had already happened. Slowly, deliberately, Sowen turned their attention to the private terminal embedded within the enclosure wall. A system older than most of the species in the chamber. Direct access. Unfiltered archives. Compact-level authorization. Their limb hovered over the interface for a brief moment. Not hesitation. Calculation. Then, they began. Search query. Human history. The system responded instantly. Too much data. A flood of records filled the display. Cultural archives, technological development logs, early expansion reports, diplomatic histories, economic profiles. Humanity was not a large civilization by galactic standards. Not yet. But their data footprint was dense. Sowen adjusted the filters. Refinement. Military engagements. Interspecies conflicts. Extinction-level events. The results narrowed. Significantly. Still large. Still complex. But now. Structured. Sowen scanned the list. Their eyes moved quickly, independently, processing multiple entries at once. Minor border disputes. Localized conflicts. Trade enforcement actions. Retaliatory strikes. Standard patterns. Expected behaviors. Nothing unusual. Then, they stopped. An entry near the top of the list had shifted. Not visually. Not flagged. But weighted. Something in the way it sat among the others. Incorrect. Sowen selected it. File. The Mora Incident. 2189. Classification. Restricted. Access level required. Elder authorization. Sowen did not hesitate this time. Authorization granted. The file opened. It was large. Larger than expected. Time index. 3 years. That alone was unusual. Most conflicts resolved faster. Or extended far longer. 3 years suggested something contained. Something intense. The record began. Initial event. A human colony. Outer expansion zone. Designation. Rhea Station. Population. Civilian. Sowen adjusted the display. Expanded the first entry. A raid. Executed by a species identified as the Mora. Insectoid. Distributed intelligence structure. Population. 6 billion. Sowen paused. Not at the number. At the classification. Established. Old. The Mora had existed for over 40,000 years. Older than many of the current compact members. The file continued. Action summary. Colony seized. Infrastructure compromised. Survivors captured. Sowen scrolled. There. A secondary line. Added later. Updated classification. Population outcome. Captured. Distributed. A pause. Then. Additional note. Juveniles included. Sowen did not move. They read the line again. Slower this time. Then continued. Human response. Initial contact issued. Formal request for return of captured civilians. Outcome. Denied. No negotiation. No exchange. No delay. Just. Refusal. Sowen adjusted the timeline. Zoomed out. Watched the progression. Day 1. Day 7. Day 30. Then. A shift. Not political. Not diplomatic. Operational. Mobilization detected. Human fleet movements increased across multiple sectors. Civilian vessels reassigned. Industrial output redirected. Logistics chains altered. Sowen leaned closer. Because this part, did not match the early profile. Humans were not, at that stage, a major military power. Their fleet capacity, limited. Their expansion, recent. And yet, the scale of movement suggested something else. Something disproportionate. Sowen continued. Engagement phase. Human forces entered Mora-controlled space. No border skirmishes. No limited response. Full incursion. System by system. Deliberate. Systematic. Relentless. Sowen scrolled faster now. Because the pattern was becoming clear. Not expansion. Not retaliation. Not even war. In the conventional sense. This was removal. Year 1. Outer colonies neutralized. Military resistance encountered. Human losses. Moderate. Mora losses. Significant. Year 2. Core systems engaged. Command structures disrupted. Population centers targeted. Sowen stopped again. Read that line twice. Population centers. Not military installations. Not strategic outposts. Population. They continued. Year 3. Remaining resistance eliminated. Infrastructure collapse across all primary worlds. No organized Mora command detected. Final entry. Short. Clinical. Species status. Functionally extinct. Sowen did not move. The chamber outside continued. Voices. Movement. Irrelevant. Inside the enclosure. There was only the file. And the final notation beneath it. Human Expeditionary Forces. Stood down. Case file. Closed. Further action. Not required. Sowen remained perfectly still. 6 billion individuals. 9 worlds. 40,000 years of continuous civilization. 3 years. The numbers did not align. Not with known models. Not with predicted capacity. Not with anything that should have been possible. And yet, there it was. Documented. Verified. Archived. Not rumor. Not exaggeration. Record. Slowly. Very slowly. Sowen closed the file. Their limb hovered above the interface for a moment longer. Then withdrew. Outside. The chamber had fully recovered. Delegates were engaged in new discussions. Trade disputes. Territorial adjustments. Resource negotiations. Verith was speaking again. Relaxed. Confident. Certain. Sowen turned their attention back to him. Looked at the Archon. Really looked this time. Measured him. Compared him. To the data. To the pattern. To the outcome. Then, for the first time in many cycles, Elder Sowen understood something. With absolute clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a minor conflict. This was not a situation that would stabilize. This was a threshold. And it had already been crossed. Because the human ambassador had not made a threat. She had referenced a precedent. And Archon Verith had not recognized it. Sowen shifted slightly within the enclosure. A movement so small. No one else noticed. But internally, something had changed. Because in all their long existence, they had learned one rule above all others. The most dangerous force in any system was not the one that reacted in anger. It was the one that had already decided exactly how it would end, and required no further discussion. For the first time in a very long time, Elder Sowen felt something unfamiliar. Not curiosity, not calculation. Something deeper. Something instinctive. Something that had once kept their species alive. Before they had learned to trust logic over it. Fear. Quiet. Cold. And entirely justified. The chamber moved on. It always did. Trade routes. Tariff disputes. Mining rights. Minor border adjustments between species that would never risk anything significant over them. The machinery of diplomacy resumed its rhythm. Predictable. Orderly. Safe. At the center of it, Archon Verith spoke with renewed ease. The matter is resolved, he said, addressing a different issue now, his tone carrying the same smooth certainty as before. We will not revisit it. No one challenged him. Why would they? From every visible angle. He was correct. The humans had issued a request. It had been dismissed. No retaliation had occurred. No escalation had followed. And the compact had chosen not to act. By every measurable standard, the situation was stable. Except, it wasn't. At the far end of the chamber, inside the glass enclosure, Elder Sowen remained completely still. They were no longer watching the chamber as a whole. They were watching patterns. Small things. Subtle things. The way certain delegates avoided looking toward the human table, even now, after it sat empty. The way two mid-tier species had lowered their voices when referencing humanity in their side discussions. The way one of the oldest civilizations present had quietly accessed historical archives of their own. Tiny deviations. Individually. Meaningless. Together. A shift. Sowen had seen this before. Not the event. The response. The moment when something unseen began to move beneath the surface. While everyone else continued behaving as if nothing had changed. That was when systems failed. That was when civilizations ended. And yet, at the center of it all, Verith stood completely unaware. Confident. Relaxed. Certain. Because from his perspective, nothing had happened. A minor species had overstepped. A correction had been applied. A message had been delivered. And that message had been received. The silence from humanity confirmed it. Submission. Across the chamber, a junior delegate leaned toward their superior. The humans have not responded, they said quietly. Of course they haven't, the superior replied. They lack the capacity. Another voice joined in, from a nearby table. They will issue a formal complaint. Perhaps withdraw from certain agreements. A pause. Nothing more. Agreement followed. Subtle gestures. Quiet confirmations. Because this was how things worked. Predictable. Contained. Manageable. But not everyone agreed. They just didn't say it out loud. In a secondary observation tier overlooking the chamber, a compact analyst sat in silence, reviewing live data streams. Name, Ku. Designation, Strategic Analysis Division. Affiliation, VT Chi. Unlike the others, he was not watching the discussion. He was watching the absence. No human transmissions. No protest signals. No emergency diplomatic channels opened. No fleet alerts issued through standard compact monitoring systems. Nothing. And that was wrong. Ku adjusted the filters. Expanded the scope. Pulled in external data, frontier reports, logistics patterns, industrial output. At first, nothing unusual. Then, a deviation. Small, human cargo routes. Not disrupted. Reassigned. Ku leaned forward slightly. Reassigned. Without announcement. Without justification. Without pattern consistency. Another data point. Energy consumption spikes. Not localized. Distributed. Across multiple human-controlled systems. Factories. Shipyards. Orbital platforms. Ku's posture shifted. Because this did not align with passive response. This was activity. Purposeful. Controlled. He pulled historical comparisons. Matched patterns. Searched for parallels. Nothing exact. But fragments. From archived conflict data. From classified reports. From restricted files. That he should not have had access to. The Mora incident. Ku froze. His eyes moved back to the chamber below. To Verith. Still speaking. Still confident. Still unaware. A slow realization began to form. Not complete. Not confirmed. But enough. Enough to trigger something deeper than analysis. Instinct. Ku stood. Abruptly enough that a nearby observer glanced at him. He ignored it. Turned. Left the observation tier. Because this was not something that could be left to data. This required escalation. Immediate. Back inside the chamber. Nothing had changed. Verith concluded his current address with a slight inclination of his head. The compact functions because it understands balance, he said. And balance requires clarity. Agreement followed. Mild. Routine. Expected. At the far end, Elder Sohan watched him. Not with curiosity. Not with interest. With recognition. Because they had seen leaders like this before. Certain. Unquestioned. Surrounded by agreement. And always, they reached the same conclusion. That they were in control. That the situation was understood. That nothing had been set in motion. That could not be stopped. Sohan shifted their gaze. Not to Verith. But to the space the human delegation had occupied. Empty now. Silent. Gone. And that, more than anything else, was what confirmed it. Because if humanity had been angry, they would have argued. If they had been afraid, they would have appealed. If they had been uncertain, they would have delayed. But they had done none of those things. They had spoken. They had issued a request. They had been refused. And then, they had left. Cleanly. Completely. Without resistance. Without noise. Without hesitation. Sohan had seen that before too. Not often. But enough. It was what happened. Right before something ended. Far below the chamber. In the deeper layers of the station. Ku moved quickly through a narrow corridor, his thoughts racing ahead of him. The data. The patterns. The silence. The file. He had not read it. Not yet. But he knew enough. Enough to understand. That something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And as he reached his private terminal, as he began initiating a restricted access request, one thought settled into place. Clear. Unavoidable. If the humans were doing what he thought they were doing, then this was not a dispute. Not a border conflict. Not a political crisis. This was preparation. And if that was true, then everyone in that chamber, including Archon Verith, was already too late. Because the most dangerous phase of any conflict was not when the first shot was fired. It was when one side stopped talking and started moving without telling anyone. Across the station, Elder Sohan closed their eyes just for a moment. And in that brief darkness, they saw it. Not clearly, not in detail, but enough. A pattern completing itself. A sequence reaching its conclusion. And when they opened their eyes again, the chamber looked the same. But it no longer felt that way. Because beneath the surface, something had already begun, and no one, except a very small number of individuals, seemed to understand that it could not be stopped. Archon Verith did not receive Ku immediately. The request had been marked urgent, then priority, then direct command review. It still sat unanswered for 9 standard hours. Because from Verith's perspective, there was nothing urgent left to discuss. The matter had been concluded in the chamber. The humans had spoken. They had been dismissed. And they had withdrawn. That was the end of it. Inside his private command suite, an elevated structure built into the upper spine of the station, Verith reviewed logistics projections for an entirely different operation. Expansion routes. Resource allocation. Forward positioning near contested systems. Progress. That was what mattered. Not the complaints of a minor species that had overreached. The chime sounded again. Ku's request. Still waiting. Verith exhaled slowly through his nasal vents, crest lowering slightly in irritation. Grant him 10 minutes, he said at last. An aide signaled compliance. Minutes later, Ku entered. He did not waste time on formalities. Archon, he said, voice controlled but tight, you need to see this. Verith did not look up immediately. He finished reading the line in front of him, closed the display. Then, finally, turned his attention to the analyst. You marked this urgent, Verith said. Explain. Ku stepped forward, placing a data module on the central console. This concerns the human response, he said. There is no response, Verith replied. There is, Ku said. It just hasn't been announced. A pause. Verith's crest lifted slightly. Then it does not exist. Ku held his ground. Human industrial output has increased across multiple systems. Civilian shipping contracts are being reassigned. Fleet movements are occurring without formal declaration. Repositioning, Verith said dismissively. A show of stability for internal audiences. No, Ku said. One word. Flat. Certain. Verith's eyes narrowed slightly. Be careful, he said. Ku did not step back. I accessed a restricted compact archive, he continued. The Mora incident. That got a reaction. Small. But real. Verith's crest stilled. For a fraction of a second. Then rose again. Old records, he said. Irrelevant. They are not irrelevant, Ku said. They are precedent. Silence. Verith leaned back slightly. Studied him. You are suggesting, he said slowly, that a species barely 60 years beyond its own system has the capacity to replicate an extinction-level campaign against an established interstellar civilization. Yes. No hesitation. No qualification. Just, yes. The word hung between them. Verith let it sit. Then, he laughed. Not loudly. Not mockingly. But with the quiet dismissal of someone hearing something fundamentally unreasonable. You have been reading human psychological constructs, he said. They exaggerate. They distort. It is a common tactic among developing species attempting to elevate perceived threat level. Ku did not respond. Because that explanation was the expected one. It fit the model. It preserved control. It allowed the current reality to remain intact. And it was wrong. The data does not support that interpretation, Ku said instead. It does not need to, Verith replied. Another pause. Then, leaning forward slightly. Tell me, Verith said, voice quieter now, more deliberate. Have the humans declared war? No. Have they issued an ultimatum? No. Have they mobilized in any way that violates compact monitoring thresholds? Ku hesitated. Because the answer was complicated. No, he said finally. Verith spread his hand slightly. Then there is no war, he said. Simple. Clean. Contained. The absence of declaration does not mean the absence of intent, Ku said. And speculation does not constitute threat, Verith replied. Silence again. He stood. Moved around the console slowly. Listen carefully, Verith said. Not angry. Not aggressive. Certain. You are an analyst. Your function is to interpret data, not to project fear into it. Ku held his gaze. This is not fear, he said. It is, Verith replied. A bit. Then. You are seeing patterns that confirm your concern and ignoring those that contradict it. That is not what is happening. It is exactly what is happening. Another pause. Verith stopped in front of him. You have served well, he said. But you are allowing a minor incident to distort your assessment of strategic reality. Minor. The word landed harder than anything else. 55 human lives. Executed. Broadcast. And classified. As minor. Ku felt something shift inside him. Not emotion. Something closer to clarity. Because in that moment, he understood. This was not a failure of data. This was a failure of perception. And perception could not be corrected if the one holding it refused to change. The Mora had 6 billion individuals, Ku said quietly. 9 worlds. 40,000 years of civilization. Verith did not respond. They took human children, Ku continued. The humans asked for their return. The Mora refused. A pause. 3 years later, Ku said, they were gone. Silence. Verith's crest lifted again. Slow. Controlled. And you believe, he said, that this is relevant to our current situation? Yes. Another pause. Then. Verith turned away. Walked back to the console. Dismissed the display entirely. The matter is closed, he said. Final. Absolute. There will be no change in our current posture. No alteration to our expansion plans. No concession to human theatrics. Ku did not move. Because there was one more thing. One final attempt. They have already decided, he said. Verith stopped. Not turning. Not responding. Just. Still. They are not negotiating, Ku continued. They are not posturing. They are not reacting. A breath. They are preparing. Silence. Longer this time. Then. Verith spoke. Without turning. Then let them prepare. And that was the moment. The exact point. Where it became irreversible. Because in every model, in every historical pattern, in every recorded collapse, there was always a line. A moment where action could still be taken. Where outcomes could still be altered. Where the future was still flexible. And then, there was the moment after. Where it wasn't. Ku stood there for a second longer. Then, slowly, he picked up the data module, turned, and walked out. No argument. No protest. No escalation. Because there was nothing left to say. Behind him, Archon Verith resumed his work. Calm. Focused. Unbothered. Certain. That he was still in control. He did not look at the door. Did not reconsider. Did not question. Because from where he stood, nothing had changed. And that, more than anything else, was the problem. Far beyond the station. In the dark between systems. Human ships were already moving. Not loudly. Not visibly. Not in ways that triggered alarms. But moving. With purpose. With coordination. With the quiet efficiency of something that had already made its decision. And had no intention of explaining it. No announcement was made. No broadcast. No declaration transmitted through the compact channels. Because announcements were for diplomacy. And this was not diplomacy. On the far side of human-controlled space, in a system that did not appear on most public maps, a shipyard that had spent the last decade assembling deep-range exploration vessels changed its output overnight. Not visibly. Not in a way that would trigger external concern. But internally, everything shifted. Production lines that had once fabricated sensor arrays and long-duration habitation modules were reconfigured. Quietly. Efficiently. Without discussion. Armor plating replaced research equipment. Reinforced hull segments replaced observation decks. Cargo space was recalculated, redistributed, repurposed. No one questioned it. Because no one needed to. The orders had arrived. Clear. Minimal. Absolute. Priority shift confirmed. That was all. And it was enough. Across 3 separate systems, orbital factories increased output by 19% within 48 hours. Not a surge. Not a spike. A steady, controlled increase. Energy consumption rose accordingly. So did material requisitions. But the changes were distributed. No single location exceeded expected variance thresholds. No single system triggered compact monitoring alerts. Individually, everything looked normal. Collectively, it was something else entirely. On Earth's moon, inside the United Defense Directorate's primary command facility, Admiral Ria Tanaka stood in a darkened operations room, watching a map that stretched across half a dozen sectors. Blue markers. Dozens of them. Ships. Stations. Supply lines. They moved slowly. Deliberately. Not converging. Not forming a visible pattern. But adjusting. Position by position. Vector by vector. Tanaka did not speak. She didn't need to. The room behind her was silent except for the low hum of processing systems and the occasional flicker of data across secondary displays. Every officer present already understood. Because the order had been given hours ago. It had not been phrased dramatically. It had not required explanation. It had been a single word. Begin. That was all. No speech. No briefing. No justification. Because none was necessary. At a secondary station, a logistics officer reviewed incoming confirmations. 3rd Reserve Fleet, recalled. 5th Reserve Fleet, recalled. Training rotations, suspended. Civilian contractors, reassigned. He paused at one line. Retired personnel. Reactivation notices had been issued. Thousands. Across multiple worlds. Most had responded within hours. Some within minutes. No hesitation. Because the message they received was not long. It did not need to be. Your country needs you. Nothing else. No details. No explanation. And still, they came. On a coastal world once called Portugal, an older man stood in a small garden, hands covered in soil, staring at the message displayed on his wrist terminal. He read it once. Then again. Then, without urgency, without panic, he turned, walked inside, cleaned his hands, packed a small bag. His partner stood in the doorway, watching him. They did not speak. They did not need to. Because both of them knew exactly what that message meant. He paused only once. At the threshold. Then nodded. And left. Across human space. Millions of small decisions like that unfolded in perfect silence. No protests. No hesitation. No confusion. Because this was not new. It was not unfamiliar. It was something older. Something ingrained. Something that did not require explanation. Back in the Lunar Command Center, Admiral Tanaka reached forward and adjusted a single parameter on the display. Fleet vectors shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough to align. Enough to begin forming something. That would not be visible. Until it was too late to stop. Behind her, General Marcos Dar entered the room. No announcement. No ceremony. He walked to her side. Looked at the display. Studied it. For a long moment. He said nothing. Then, quietly, full mobilization. Tanaka did not look at him. Yes. The words settled into the room. Heavy. Final. Dar nodded once. No surprise. No hesitation. Because he had seen this before. Not this exact situation. But the pattern. The shift. The moment when something moved. From possibility to certainty. He traced one of the projected paths on the display with his eyes. Then another. Then another. A slow realization formed. These aren't defensive positions, he said. No. They're not aimed at the frontier. No. A pause. Dar looked at her then. Really looked. They're deeper. Tanaka nodded. Yes. Silence. Because that meant something very specific. It meant this was not containment. This was not retaliation. This was not a border conflict. This was resolution. Dar exhaled slowly. Then, without another word, he moved to a secondary station, pulled up his briefing files, and began working. Because at this stage, there was nothing left to debate. Only execution. Far from the command center, on the edges of mapped space, ships that had not moved in years, moved. Old defense platforms powered up, colonial vessels rerouted, cargo freighters stripped and reinforced. Not ideal, not efficient, but sufficient, because perfection was not required. Only volume, only persistence, only commitment. And that humanity had in abundance, across every system, across every station, across every shipyard. The same pattern repeated, quietly, efficiently, without announcement, without fear, without doubt, because the decision had already been made. Days ago, in a chamber, where 12 names had been spoken and ignored. Back at the compact station, nothing had changed. Officially, no alerts, no warnings, no declarations. The galaxy continued, unaware, but beneath that surface, something vast was beginning to align. Not quickly, not chaotically, but with the steady, unstoppable precision of a species that had decided that something needed to end, and would not stop until it did. This is not panic, Tanaka said quietly, almost to herself. No one responded. They didn't need to, because everyone in that room already understood exactly what it was. This is preparation. And far beyond the reach of any sensor grid, beyond the edge of what the compact could see, the first elements of something much larger began to move into position, unseen, unannounced, and entirely inevitable. The emergency session was called 3 days later. This time, the chamber was full. Not out of routine obligation, not out of diplomatic formality, but because something had changed. Reports had begun to circulate, quietly at first, then with increasing clarity. Human fleet movements, industrial output spikes, unusual coordination across distant systems. Nothing overt, nothing that violated compact law, but enough to make even the most indifferent species pay attention. Ambassador Yoel Okafor was present. She sat in the same position as before, same posture, same stillness, as if nothing had changed. Around her, everything had. Delegates who had ignored her days earlier now watched, closely, carefully, because uncertainty was beginning to replace certainty. At the central podium, Perth activated the session. This emergency assembly has been convened, the moderator said, voice carrying a strain that had not been there before, to address recent developments involving human fleet activity and regional stability concerns. Carefully worded, deliberately neutral, but insufficient to hide the truth. Something was happening, and no one was fully in control of it. A mid-tier delegate spoke first. The scale of these movements, they said, appears disproportionate. Another followed. We request clarification regarding intent. A third, more direct. Is humanity preparing for war? The question lingered. No one rushed to answer it, because for the first time, they weren't asking each other. They were asking her. All eyes shifted to the human table. Okafor did not respond immediately. She let the silence settle. Let the weight of the question fully exist in the room. Then, she stood. The movement was familiar now, but it carried a different energy. Less tension, more certainty. The compact charter, she said, voice calm and even, under Article 7, grants any member species the right to pursue independent military redress when the Council fails to act within the required time frame. A pause. The Council was given 30 standard days. Her eyes moved across the chamber. It has been 37. No one interrupted. No one objected. Because that was fact, not interpretation. The United Earth Directorate, she continued, is now operating within its legal authority. Legal. The word landed differently this time. Not as justification. As confirmation. Another pause. Then, she added, "We appreciate the Council's concern." Polite. Measured. And completely empty. Because concern was no longer relevant. A delegate near the front leaned forward. "Ambassador," they said, "before this escalates further, we must understand your intent. Proportionality must be maintained." There it was. The word that always came. Proportionality. Balance. Containment. The assumption that this could still be controlled. Okafor looked at them. Not dismissively. Not with hostility. Just directly. And for a brief moment, something shifted behind her eyes. Not emotion. Something older. Something deeper. "You are asking," she said slowly, "why our response appears disproportionate." No one spoke. Because the answer was already forming. "You are asking," she continued, "what threshold has been crossed?" A pause. Then, she answered, "They killed 55 of our people." The number settled into the chamber. Not abstract. Not distant. Present. "They executed them," she said. Deliberately. Publicly. As a message. Silence. And then, she added, "They wanted the galaxy to see it." A slight tilt of her head. "So now." Her gaze moved across the room. "The galaxy will see our response." No anger. No raised voice. Just clarity. A delegate from one of the older species shifted. "That does not justify total escalation," they said carefully. "No," Okafor replied. And that caught them off guard. Because they expected argument. Defense. Instead. Agreement. "You are correct," she said. A pause. By itself, it does not. The chamber stilled. Because something was coming. And everyone felt it. Then, she spoke again. "They took children." The words were quiet. Almost soft. But they hit harder than anything that had come before. Several delegates froze. Not physically. Internally. Because that changed everything. Not legally. Not politically. But fundamentally. "They took children from a human colony," Okafor continued. "They did not kill them. They did not negotiate. They took them and sold them." No one moved. No one spoke. Because there was nothing in any translation system that could soften that meaning. Okafor did not look away. "That was not this incident," she said. Another pause. "That was the last time." The chamber went completely still. Because now, they understood. Not fully, but enough. Enough to connect the warning to something real. Something documented. Something irreversible. "When someone takes our children," Okafor said, voice still calm, still even, "we do not stop." No emphasis. No dramatic pause. Just truth. "We cannot stop," she continued. "It is not a policy decision. It is not a strategic choice. A breath. It is older than our governments. Another. Older than our expansion. And finally, older than most of what we would call civilization." Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Because this was no longer about politics. No longer about law. No longer about proportionality. This was something else. Something that could not be negotiated with. A delegate near the back spoke, voice quieter now. "The VT Kai did not take children." Okafor nodded once. "No," she said. Another pause. "They killed 55 of our people." Her eyes met theirs, and they broadcast it. A slight tilt of her head. That is a different threshold. Silence. But it is still a threshold. The words settled. Locked into place. Final. A long moment passed. Then, a single question. From the far end of the chamber. Elder Sowen. Is there anything, the ancient being asked, voice soft and layered, that would stop this? The entire chamber turned. Because that was the question. The only one that mattered. Okafor considered it. Not for long. But long enough. To show that she was not dismissing it. If Archon Verith surrendered unconditionally, she said, released all prisoners, submitted to tribunal, and accepted full compact oversight for the next century. A pause. Then perhaps. The word hung there. Fragile. Unlikely. Then. She added. He won't. Sowen was silent for a moment. Then. No, the elder said quietly. He won't. Okafor inclined her head once. Acknowledgement. Then. She gathered her materials. Turned. And walked out. Again. No hesitation. No delay. Because there was nothing left to say. Behind her. The chamber remained frozen. Because for the first time, everyone in that room understood something they had not understood before. This was not escalation. This was not reaction. This was not even war, in the way they defined it. This was a process, already in motion, already justified, already too far along to stop. And far beyond the station, human fleets continued to move. Not faster, not louder, just forward, as they had been, since the moment the decision had been made. The formal reply arrived 9 days after the request. It was short. 1 paragraph. No greeting. No acknowledgement beyond protocol. Just position. The message appeared simultaneously across multiple channels: compact archive, diplomatic relay, and direct transmission to the human delegation. From Archon Verith, VT Kai Command Authority Subject. Human petition, status review. Ambassador Okafor read it in silence. Around her, the chamber remained active. Delegates speaking in controlled tones, aides exchanging data, minor disputes unfolding with their usual predictable rhythm. None of it mattered. She read the message once. Then again. Not because it was complex, but because of how simple it was. Content. Surviving human crew members classified as lawful detainees. Detention upheld under VT Kai Territorial Code. Review timeline, up to 4 standard years. Tribunal request, acknowledged, filed, no action scheduled. Further communication, not required. That was all. No compromise. No delay. No reconsideration. Just refusal. Clean. Complete. Inevitable. Okafor lowered the display. Her expression did not change. But something behind it. Closed. Not abruptly. Not emotionally. Simply. Finished. Across the chamber, a delegate from a mid-tier alliance leaned toward another. Well, they said quietly, that resolves it. Of course it does, came the reply. There was never any real possibility of escalation. A third voice joined in. The humans will protest. Perhaps withdraw from certain agreements. A pause. They will adapt. Agreement followed. Because this was how the galaxy worked. Power dictated outcome. And the VT Kai held the power. At least. That was the assumption. At the central podium, Perth initiated a procedural vote. A motion has been submitted, the moderator said carefully, to review the VT Kai response under compact oversight and consider sanctions pending investigation. A ripple moved through the chamber. Not shock. Reluctance. Because this was the moment where action could still be taken. Where the system could intervene. Where balance could be restored. Votes were cast. One by one. Affirmative. Negative. Abstain. The results began to form. Close. closer than expected. Then, two delegations shifted, quietly, deliberately, from support to abstention. The motion failed, not by overwhelming opposition, but by procedure. Technical, clean, final. No sanctions, no oversight, no intervention. The compact had chosen not to act. The results settled into the chamber. Not loudly, not dramatically, just there. A decision. One that could not be undone. Ambassador Okafor watched the vote conclude. She did not look surprised. She did not look disappointed. She looked confirmed, as if the outcome had already been known. And this was simply verification. She stood, gathered her materials. No rush, no hesitation. Then turned and walked out. For the last time. Behind her, the chamber resumed motion. Because that was what it always did. Absorb, redirect, continue. But something was different now. Subtle, almost invisible, yet unmistakable. Because this time, the system had not just failed to act. It had chosen not to. And that choice carried weight. Far beyond the chamber. Far beyond the station. Far beyond anything the compact could now control. On Earth's moon. Inside the United Defense Directorate. Admiral Tanaka received the same message. She read it once. Then set it aside. No reaction. No comment. No visible response. She reached for a different display. A map. Expanded. Zoomed outward. Blue markers. Red markers. Positions. Vectors. Distances. She studied it for a moment. Then, without hesitation, she issued a command. Recall all reserve fleets. The officer beside her did not ask for clarification. Did not question the scope. Because the tone was enough. Third and fifth already in transit, he said. Accelerate, Tanaka replied. A pause. Then, she added. Full mobilization. The words settled into the room. Heavy. Final. Irreversible. Across the command center. Systems responded instantly. Orders transmitted. Confirmations received. Movement increased. Not chaotic. Not rushed. But absolute. Because this was no longer preparation. This was execution. Back at the compact station, Elder Sohan watched the chamber slowly return to its usual state. Conversations resumed. Data flowed. Decisions continued. As if nothing had changed. But Sohan knew better. Because they had seen the vote. They had seen the shift. They had seen the moment. Where the last opportunity had passed. And they understood. With absolute certainty. What came next. Not because they could see the future. But because they had seen the pattern. Again. And again. And again. A warning issued. Ignored. A request made. Denied. A system given the chance to act. Refusing. And then. Silence. Followed by movement. Followed by. End. Far beyond the reach of the compact. Human fleets were no longer adjusting. They were aligning. No longer preparing. Advancing. No longer waiting. Because the question had been asked. And answered. Completely. And from this point forward, there would be no more discussion. No more negotiation. No more restraint. Only outcome. It came with a sensor anomaly. At the outer edge of VT Chi-controlled space, a long-range detection array registered a cluster of incoming objects, small at first glance, moving at suboptimal burn patterns, scattered across a wide approach vector. Not a fleet formation. Not an attack posture. Irregular. Uncoordinated. The duty officer flagged it for routine review. Probably civilian drift, someone muttered. Or misaligned navigation. The data was forwarded. Categorized. Logged. And then reclassified. Because the numbers kept increasing. Not rapidly, but steadily. And the trajectories did not diverge. They converged. Within 2 hours, the anomaly was no longer dismissible. Within 4, it had a designation: unidentified inbound formation. Within 6, it had a classification: potential hostile movement. And by the 8th hour, it had a destination: VT Chi outer defense perimeter. The alert was transmitted up the chain. By the time it reached Archon Verith, the response was already forming. Inside the command center above Breath Prime, a holographic projection expanded across the room, mapping the incoming vectors in sharp lines of light. Verith stood at its center, studying it. Not concerned. Interested. "So," he said, voice calm, "they've decided to act." Around him, strategists adjusted parameters, overlaying defensive grids, calculating interception points, projecting engagement outcomes. The results stabilized quickly. Favorable. Highly favorable. "These are not primary fleets," one officer noted. "Mass signatures inconsistent with capital-class vessels." "Composition suggests mixed origin," another added. "Possibly retrofitted civilian frames." A third. "More direct. They are testing us." Veritha's crest lifted slightly. "Then we will provide the result of that test." Orders were issued. Defense platforms activated. Minefields recalibrated. Interceptor squadrons deployed. Not in haste. Not in panic. But with the practiced efficiency of a civilization that had fought, and won, wars before. Because from every available metric, this was manageable, predictable, containable. The first human ships entered engagement range 11 hours after initial detection. They did not break formation. They did not scatter. They did not attempt evasion. They continued forward, directly into the defense grid. The first shots were fired by the VT Chi. Clean, precise, devastating. The leading human vessel, an older frame, its structure visibly reinforced but not designed for combat, took the impact across its forward hull. It did not survive. It broke apart instantly. Debris scattered across the void. No return fire. No maneuver. Just loss. The second ship followed seconds later, destroyed before it could cross the minefield threshold. Then the third. And the fourth. The engagement unfolded exactly as predicted. VT Chi defensive systems operated at peak efficiency. Target acquisition was flawless. Weapon cycling optimal. Human ships fell one after another, before they could even reach effective firing range. Inside the command center, a low ripple of satisfaction moved through the officers. "Minimal resistance," one observed. "Disorganized approach," said another. "Expected outcome." Verith watched it all in silence. Not surprised. Not impressed. Confirmed. Because this was what reality looked like. Not speculation. Not archived myths. Actual engagement. And the results were exactly what they should be. The first wave ended in less than 19 minutes. Total human losses: significant. VT Chi losses: negligible. The defense grid remained intact. Operational capacity unchanged. A clean victory. "Record the engagement," Verith said. "Distribute a summary to compact channels." A pause. Then, "Let them see." The message was clear. Reinforcement. Confirmation. Proof. The humans were not what they claimed. They were not what the warning implied. They were predictable, containable, beatable. Hours passed. Repairs were initiated. Minor recalibrations made. Confidence stabilized. Then, new data appeared. Another cluster. Larger this time. More organized. Still not a full fleet. But closer. Approaching along a different vector. "Second wave," an officer said. Verith did not react. "Intercept as before," he ordered. The defense grid adjusted. Weapons realigned. Engagement parameters recalculated. The second wave entered range. And again. The VT Chi fired first. This time, The humans returned fire. Weak, uncoordinated, ineffective. Their shots struck outer defense platforms, causing minor damage. Nothing critical. Nothing lasting. The outcome remained the same. Human ships destroyed. One by one. Another engagement. Another victory. This one. Longer. Costlier. But still. Controlled. Inside the command center, the mood shifted. Not to relief. To confidence. Because now, there was evidence. Twice. Repeated. Consistent. This is unsustainable for them, one strategist said. They cannot maintain this level of loss. They don't need to, another replied. They'll stop after this. Vereth nodded slightly. They've made their statement, he said. Now they will accept reality. Across the room, Ku stood in silence, watching the same data, seeing something else. Because the numbers did not align. The scale of the waves, the composition, the loss tolerance. It didn't match the projections. It didn't match the file. It didn't match what he had seen. He stepped forward. Arkan. Vereth raised a hand. Not looking at him. Not now. Dismissed. Again. Ku stopped. Because there was nothing left that could be said. Not here. Not now. He stepped back. Returned to the edge of the room. And watched. Because this part was always the same. The early stage. The part where it looked like it could still be won. The part where the stronger side believed they were in control. And across the void, far beyond the range of immediate sensors, more human ships were already on their way. Not faster, not louder, just more. And the worst part, the part no one in that room seemed to understand, was this. That wasn't failure. That wasn't desperation. That wasn't even resistance. It was measurement. And the results were exactly what the humans needed. Because now, they knew exactly how much it would take, and how long it would last, and what it would cost. And they had already decided that the answer was acceptable. The third wave was already in motion. And this time, it would not look the same. But by the time anyone realized that, it wouldn't matter. Because the most dangerous moment in any conflict is not when the first attack fails. It's when the side that failed does not stop, and has no intention of ever stopping. The second wave ended the way the first had. Contained, but not clean. Debris fields now hung across the outer perimeter, slow-moving clouds of shattered hulls, ionized fragments, drifting signals from dead systems still echoing faintly into the void. The VT Kai defense grid remained intact, but it was no longer untouched. 3 outer platforms reported structural compromise. 2 required partial shutdown for recalibration. Minefield density had dropped by 14%. Minor losses. Acceptable, but no longer negligible. Inside the command center, the atmosphere had shifted. Not to concern. Not yet. But to focus. Because the pattern was continuing. They're adjusting, one strategist said, highlighting a series of approach vectors on the display. Second wave altered timing and spacing. Reduced clustering. Increased survivability margin. Still ineffective, another replied. Yes, the first agreed. A pause. But less ineffective. That was new. Vereth stood at the center of the projection, watching the updated models compile. They are learning, he said. Not impressed. Not worried. Just observing. Then they will learn faster, he added, when this ends. A few officers signaled agreement. Because from their perspective, this was already decided. The humans had committed to an unsustainable offensive. They were taking losses they could not afford. They were attacking a fortified system that had taken decades to construct. There was only one outcome. Time. Time would end this. It always did. Projected continuation. Vereth asked. Limited. a strategist replied. If they attempt a third wave, it will be smaller. Resource depletion indicators suggest declining capacity. Or none at all, another added. They may withdraw after this engagement cycle. Verith nodded once. Prepare for both scenarios. Orders were issued. Reinforcements rotated. Defensive coverage redistributed. Repair teams accelerated. Efficient. Controlled. Predictable. At the edge of the room, Ku watched in silence. Because the projections were wrong. Not in detail. In assumption. He stepped forward again. This time, he didn't wait. The third wave will not be smaller, he said. The room quieted slightly. Not fully, but enough. Verith did not turn. You have already spoken on this matter, he said. I was not finished. That got attention. Several officers glanced toward Ku. Because interruption at this level was not standard. It was not permitted. Verith turned slowly. His crest lowered. Not fully, but enough to signal irritation. Then finish, he said. Ku stepped closer to the projection. Expanded the data. Overlaid new inputs. These were not primary fleets, he said, referencing the previous engagements. Mass signatures confirm mixed composition, civilian conversions, outdated defense platforms, reserve units. We are aware of this, a strategist said. Yes, Ku replied. But you are interpreting it incorrectly. A pause. They are not committing their main force. Silence. Verith's eyes narrowed slightly. On what basis? He asked. Ku adjusted the display again. New data points appeared. Shipyard output. Logistics throughput. Energy consumption. All rising. All available indicators show continued production increase, Ku said. No reduction. No diversion. No indication of resource strain. That is not sustainable, someone said. It doesn't need to be, Ku replied. Another pause. Then, they are not pacing for sustainability. The words settled into the room. They are pacing for completion. Silence. Because that did not fit the model. Completion of what? Verith asked. Ku looked at him. Directly. The conflict. A few officers exchanged glances. Uneasy now. But still. Not convinced. They have already taken unacceptable losses, one said. Any rational command structure would reassess. Yes, Ku said. A pause. Any rational command structure would. The implication hung there. Unspoken. Uncomfortable. Verith stepped closer. You are suggesting irrationality. No, Ku said. Another pause. I'm suggesting a different objective. Silence. Because that was harder to dismiss. Verith studied him for a long moment. Then, what objective? He asked. Ku didn't answer immediately, because saying it out loud would change something. Not the outcome, but the perception. And perception was already fragile. Finally, they are not trying to win the engagement, he said. A beat. They are trying to remove resistance. No one spoke. Because that sounded wrong. Too absolute. Too final. That is the same thing, a strategist said after a moment. No, Ku replied. It isn't. Another silence. Then, a signal. New data. Incoming. The room shifted instantly. Focus snapped back to the projection. A new cluster had appeared. Larger. Denser. And this time, coherent. Third wave, an officer said. But the tone was different. Because this did not look like the previous two. The formation held. Tighter. More structured. Approach vectors aligned. Timing synchronized. No drift. No fragmentation. This looked like intent. Verith stepped forward. Studied it. Then, calmly, engage. The defense grid activated again. Weapons aligned. Target locks acquired. The third wave entered range. And for the first time, the exchange was not one-sided. Human ships did not break. They did not scatter. They absorbed impact, adjusted, and returned fire. Not perfectly, not efficiently, but persistently. Defense platforms took sustained damage. Minefields triggered earlier than predicted. Interceptor losses increased. Not catastrophic, but noticeable. Damage reports. Verith asked. Outer grid at 82% capacity, an officer replied. Holding. Holding. The word carried weight now, because it had not needed to be said before. The engagement stretched. Minutes became hours. Losses mounted. On both sides. Still, the VT Kai held the line. Still, they controlled the perimeter. Still, they were winning. But not as easily. Inside the command center, the confidence had shifted again. Not gone, but thinner. More focused. Less certain. They're committing more resources, one strategist said. They're burning through them, another replied. Yes, the first agreed. A pause. But they're still coming. Silence. Because that was the problem. Not the losses. Not the damage. Not even the pressure. The continuation. Because by every model, they should have stopped. Reassessed. Withdrawn. But they hadn't. And that did not fit. At the edge of the room, Ku closed his eyes briefly. Because now, it was visible. Not fully, but enough. The pattern. The sequence. The inevitability. He opened them again. Just as a new signal appeared. Deep-range sensors. Beyond the engagement zone. Beyond the current battle. Something else. Larger. Approaching. And this time, no one spoke. Because whatever it was, it did not look like a wave. It did not look like reinforcement. It did not look like anything they had seen before. And for the first time, inside that room, the possibility that Ku might be right began to exist. Not accepted, not fully understood, but present. And once that possibility exists, it cannot be removed, only confirmed, or realized. Too late. The third wave continued to press. The defense grid continued to hold. But somewhere beyond the edge of the map, something else was already on its way. And it would not be measured in waves, but in finality. The third wave was still burning against the perimeter when the signal came in. Deep range. Far beyond the engagement zone. Far beyond the outer sensor grid. At first, it didn't register as a threat. The data return was wrong. Too large. Too diffuse. Too uniform. Sensor error. Someone suggested. No, another replied. Signal consistency across multiple arrays. The room quieted. Because consistency meant it was real. Refine, Verith ordered. The projection expanded. The battlefield compressed to one side of the display. Still active. Still contested. And beyond it, a new layer unfolded. At first, it looked like noise. A dense field of faint returns. Then, the system recalibrated. And the noise became shape. Not a formation. Not a fleet. A mass. Endless. Spanning across the display in a slow, advancing line. No clear structure. No central command cluster. No identifiable flagship. Just volume. Quantify, Verith said. There was a pause. Because the system was struggling. Not with accuracy. With scale. Unable to assign full count, an officer said finally. Estimates exceeding standard fleet classification parameters. Another adjusted the filter. Focused on mass distribution. Heat signatures. Engine outputs. The image sharpened. And with it, understanding began. These are not all combat vessels, someone said. No, another replied slowly. They're everything. Silence. Because that was not supposed to happen. Civilian freighters, colonial transports, old defense ships, reserve carriers, ships that should never be in a war zone, ships that had no business being there, were there, and they were moving, all of them, together, toward one point, toward one system, toward them. Ku stepped forward, slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. "This is the main force," he said. No one responded, because no one wanted to say it first. "They didn't commit it before," he continued. Still calm, still controlled. They were measuring. The words settled into the room. Heavy. Final. Verith did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the projection, because what he was seeing did not align with any model, any doctrine, any war he had ever studied. "This is not a fleet," one strategist said. "No," Ku replied. "It isn't." A pause. Then, "It's a species." Silence. Absolute. Because that was the truth. Not a military response. Not a strategic deployment. A collective decision. Every available asset. Every available resource. Every available ship. Moving. At once. Toward one objective. Verith's crest lowered. Not in submission. In focus. "How long?" he asked. The question came out quieter than expected. Because now, it mattered. "Time to contact," an officer clarified. "Yes." Calculations ran. Faster now. Because urgency had entered the system. Primary mass will reach outer perimeter in. A pause. 7 days. 7. The number echoed. Too small. Far too small. And full arrival. Another pause. Staggered over 12 days. 12. Not waves. Not cycles. Continuous. Unbroken. Verith straightened. Control reasserting itself. "Reinforce the grid," he said. "Call all available fleets. Redirect outer patrols. We hold the line." Orders moved instantly. Commands transmitted. Fleets redirected. Defensive systems recalibrated. Because that was what you did. You held. You adapted. You resisted. And eventually, the attacker broke. They always did. Except, Ku didn't move. Didn't acknowledge the orders. Because he had already run the numbers. All of them. Every projection. Every variable. Every possible outcome. And none of them ended the way Verith thought they would. "Arkan," he said. Quiet. But clear. Verith did not look at him. Not now. But this time. Ku did not stop. "This will not hold." That cut through the room. Because it wasn't analysis anymore. It was conclusion. Verith turned. Slowly. Deliberately. "You are out of line." "Yes." No hesitation. Because that didn't matter anymore. This defense grid was built over 40 years, Verith said. Layered, reinforced, tested against multiple threat models. "It will slow them," Ku said. A pause. "Not stop them." Silence. Because that was the line no one wanted to cross. "They are not attacking as a fleet," Ku continued. "They are not operating under loss thresholds. They are not pacing for sustainability. A breath. They are applying total capacity." The words landed. And this time, no one dismissed them. Because the evidence was on the screen. Verith looked back at the projection. At the wall. Because that's what it was now. Not a formation. Not a strategy. A wall. Moving. Relentless. Unstoppable. In the way that only something that does not intend to stop can be. "How?" he said. Not to Ku. Not to anyone. Just. "How?" No one answered. Because there was no answer. That fit within the system they understood. Only one. That didn't. Across the void. The mass continued to advance. Unchanged. Unbroken. Unconcerned. Because for humanity, This was no longer a question of winning, or losing, or balance, or negotiation. It was completion. And they had already decided what that looked like. The third wave still fought at the perimeter, still engaged, still pressing. But now, it was clear, they were not the attack. They were the beginning, the measurement, the calculation. And behind them, the answer was already on its way. And when it arrived, there would be no second attempt, no adjustment, no retreat, only end. Because the most dangerous realization in any war is not that the enemy is stronger than expected. It's that the enemy is not trying to win. They are trying to finish. And by the time you understand that, it's already too late. The wall arrived on the 7th day. Not all at once. It didn't need to. The first elements appeared at the edge of the outer sensor grid, distant, faint, barely distinguishable from background noise. Then more. Then more. And then, the display stopped trying to count. Because counting no longer mattered. What mattered was direction. And everything was moving the same way. Toward Breath Prime. Toward the core. Toward completion. Inside the VT Kai command center, no one spoke as the first wave of the main force entered engagement range. Because this was not like before. Not a cluster. Not a formation. Not even a fleet. A front. Wide. Deep. Continuous. There were no gaps. No weak points. No command ships to target. No structure to break. Engage all batteries, Verith ordered. The defense grid responded instantly. Every platform. Every turret. Every interceptor. Firing. The void lit up. Beams of coherent energy cut across space in precise, devastating lines. Missiles launched in coordinated salvos. Minefields detonated in cascading bursts of controlled destruction. And for a moment, it worked. Ships at the front of the human advance were destroyed, torn apart, reduced to debris. The line slowed. Inside the command center, tension shifted. Hope flickered. Because the system was holding, just as it had before, just as it was designed to. Maintain fire, Verith said. And they did. The second layer of the wall entered range. And then the third. And the fourth. For every ship destroyed, another replaced it. Then another. Then 3 more behind that. No hesitation. No deviation. Just forward. The defense grid strained. Targeting systems cycled faster than design limits. Heat thresholds climbed. Energy reserves began to dip. Outer platforms at 68% capacity, an officer reported. Maintain output. The order was immediate. Because slowing down was not an option. But the problem was not the front. It was the depth. The wall did not end. It did not thin. It did not weaken. It continued. Unbroken. Relentless. And slowly, inevitably, it began to push through. The outer minefields collapsed first. Not all at once. But piece by piece. Triggered. Overloaded. Cleared. Human ships did not avoid them. They moved through them. Accepting losses. Absorbing damage. Closing distance. Because distance was the only thing that mattered. Interceptor losses increasing, another officer said. Deploy reserves. They did. Fresh squadrons launched. Engaged. Fought. Died. And still, the wall advanced. Inside the command center, the atmosphere had changed. Not panic. Not yet. But something close. Because now, the numbers no longer made sense. Losses were mounting. On both sides. But only one side was slowing. And it wasn't the humans. They're not adjusting, one strategist said. Voice tight now. They're not adapting to resistance. They don't need to, Ku said quietly from the edge of the room. No one told him to stop. Because no one could. They're not optimizing, he continued. They're not conserving resources. A pause. They're applying volume. The words landed. And this time, they stayed. Verith did not respond. Because he was watching something else. The inner defense perimeter. The final line. The strongest layer. Fortified. Reinforced. Built. To never fall. Redirect all power to inner grid, he ordered. Energy shifted. Systems rebalanced. The outer defenses were abandoned. Not fully, but enough. Because now, everything depended on the core. The wall reached it. On the 8th day. And this time, there was no slowing. The human advance hit the inner grid. All at once. Every ship. Every vector. Every available force. Engaged. The impact was immediate. Violent. Sustained. Defense platforms fired continuously. Without pause. Without rotation. Without rest. And still, the pressure increased. Structural integrity dropping, an officer said. Maintain output. But output was no longer enough. Because the problem was not firepower. It was endurance. The VT Kai had built a system to withstand attack. But not this. Not something that did not stop. Not something that did not break. Not something that did not care what it lost. Because humanity was not fighting as a fleet. It was fighting as a whole. Every system, every ship, every resource, applied continuously until the problem was gone. The inner grid failed. At 8:17 station time. Not dramatically. Not with a single explosion. But with a sequence of cascading collapses. One platform. Then another. Then a section. Gone. And through that opening, the wall moved. Into the system. Unopposed. Inside the command center. Silence. Because there was no longer anything to say. No strategy left. No adjustment possible. No line remaining. Verith stood at the center of the projection, watching the advance. For a long moment, he did not move, did not speak, did not react. Because this part, was not in any model, not in any simulation, not in any history he had studied. How, he said again. But this time, the question did not matter. Because the answer was already there. On the screen. In the numbers. In the movement. In the wall. That did not stop. Behind him. Ku closed his eyes. Just for a second. Because now. It was complete. The pattern. The sequence. The inevitability. There was nothing left. To interpret. Only. To witness. Across the system. Human ships spread outward. Not chaotically. Not randomly. But methodically. System by system. Target by target. Infrastructure. Command centers. Military stations. Not rushed. Not delayed. Just. Done. And still. More ships arrived. Because the wall had not ended. It was still coming. Still advancing. Still applying pressure. Until there would be nothing left to resist. Because this was never about winning. It was never about balance. It was never about proving strength. It was about ending the problem completely. And now, that process was underway, with nothing left to stop it. The 10th day was the last day it could still be called a battle. After that, it became something else. Because battles have structure. They have fronts. They have resistance. They have outcomes that can still change. This no longer did. The final organized VT Kai fleet formation broke apart at 3:12 system time. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But inevitably. A command group attempted to consolidate near the inner orbital ring. 3 carriers. 6 escorts. A remaining cluster of defense craft. They formed a line. Held position. Prepared to engage. For 8 minutes. They did. They fired. They maneuvered. They resisted. And then, they were gone. Not routed. Not scattered. Removed. Cleanly. Completely. As if the space they occupied had simply been cleared. After that, there were no more formations. No more coordinated resistance. No more command signals. That lasted longer than a few seconds. The VT Chi military ceased to exist. Not in theory. Not in projection. In function. Gone. Across the system, human forces continued. Not faster. Not slower. At the same steady pace. Because nothing had changed. The objective remained. And it had not yet been completed. Command centers were targeted next. Orbital stations. Communication arrays. Control hubs. Each one identified. Each one engaged. Each one removed. No repeated strikes. No prolonged engagements. Just precision. Followed by absence. On the surface of Breath Prime, cities went dark. Not from chaos. Not from panic. But from disconnection. Systems failed. Networks collapsed. Power grids shut down. As the infrastructure that supported them was systematically dismantled. There were no broadcasts. No declarations. No speeches. Because this was not meant to be seen. It was meant to be finished. In a remote section of the system, Ku stood inside a requisitioned evacuation station, watching the last transport detach from the docking ring. It was overloaded. Beyond safe capacity. But still, it launched. One of dozens. One of hundreds. Civilian ships. Packed. Disorganized. Desperate. But moving. Because Ku had made a decision. Not authorized. Not approved. But necessary. He had spent the last 48 hours doing one thing. Moving civilians. Anyone he could reach. Anyone he could convince. Anyone he could force. If it came to that. Off-world. Away from the system. Toward a neutral compact station. 60 light-years out. Far enough. He hoped. He had sent a message. To the human command. Marked direct. Not a negotiation. Not a request. A statement. Coordinates. Numbers. Intent. He had expected no reply. But one had come. 4 hours later. Short. Unclear. Those 400,000 are not our concern. Proceed. Ku had read it twice. Because the meaning was not obvious. Not at first. It could have meant they did not care. That the civilians would be included. Or it could have meant they were not targets. That the evacuation was irrelevant to what came next. He chose to believe the second. Not because it was confirmed, but because it was necessary. Because without that belief, there would be nothing left worth doing. The final transport cleared the station. Ku watched it disappear into the dark. Then turned back to the display. System map. What remained of it? Because most of it was gone. Markers that had once represented fleets. Gone. Stations. Gone. Command structures. Gone. Only fragments remained. And those were being removed. One by one. Across the system. The campaign continued. Not as a battle. As a process. Systematic. Thorough. Relentless. Human forces moved outward from Breath Prime. To the colony worlds. Then beyond. Every installation. Every outpost. Every remaining point of resistance. Addressed. And then. Removed. No pauses. No delays. No negotiation. Because negotiation had already been offered. And refused. At the edge of the system. Compact observation vessels remained. Stationary. Watching. Recording. But not moving. Because every species aboard those ships had reached the same conclusion. Quietly. Individually. Without needing to say it out loud. This was not something to intervene in. Not something to challenge. Not something they could stop. Back on the compact station, session after session was called. Resolutions drafted. Debates held. Words spoken. Carefully, cautiously, pointlessly, because while they spoke, the outcome was already being written, not in the chamber, but out there, in the dark between systems, where human ships continued to move, without interruption, without hesitation, without end. On the 11th day, the last VT Chi signal was recorded, not a command, not a transmission, just a fragment, uncoordinated, unanswered. Then, silence, total, complete. The system was quiet, not peaceful, not calm, empty, because everything that had defined it was gone. And still, human forces continued their sweep, not because it was necessary, but because it had not yet been confirmed that nothing remained. And until that confirmation existed, they would not stop, because that was the difference, the one no one had understood. Until now, humanity did not fight. Until victory, they fought. Until completion, and completion did not allow for uncertainty, or survivors, or recovery, only end. Ku sat alone in the evacuation station, watching the final reports come in, reading them, understanding them, because this was what he had tried to explain, what he had tried to prevent. Too late. Always too late. He leaned back slowly, closed his eyes, and for the first time since the data had begun to align, he allowed himself to stop analyzing, because there was nothing left to analyze, only to accept that an entire civilization, billions of lives, thousands of years, had ended in days. And the worst part, the part that would remain long after this moment passed, was not how it ended, but how clearly it had been warned, and how completely that warning had been ignored. The chamber was full again, not out of obligation, out of necessity, because what had happened could not be ignored. Not anymore. The seat once occupied by the VT Chi delegation was empty. Not symbolically, permanently. No representative. No signal. No communication. Just absence. At the central podium, General Marcos Dar stood alone. No escort. No ceremony. No introduction. He had requested to deliver the report in person, and the council had agreed. Not because it was protocol, but because refusing did not feel like an option. Dar looked older than most had expected. Not frail, but worn. The kind of wear that came from long years and longer decisions. He placed a single data slate on the podium, activated it, and began to read. No preamble, no commentary, no emotion, just facts. Engagement summary, he said. His voice was steady, measured, unremarkable, which made it worse. Primary system designation, breath prime. A pause. Duration of initial engagement phase, 11 days. No reaction, no interruption, because everyone in the room already knew, but hearing it made it real. Total VT Chi military assets identified within system at time of engagement, he continued. Numbers followed. Fleet counts, platform counts, defense grids. Each one. Read. Clearly. Slowly. Without emphasis. Status. Non-operational. The words landed flat, because they were not dramatic. They were not framed. They were simply true. Dar did not pause. He moved to the next section. Infrastructure targets. Orbital stations. Command centers. Shipyards. Communication arrays. Each one listed. Each one followed by the same result. Destroyed. 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 The repetition built. Not through tone. Through consistency. Because there was no variation. No exceptions. No recovery points. Just outcome. Colonial network, Dar said. A new list. World designations. Population centers. Industrial hubs. Each one addressed. Each one removed. The chamber remained silent. Not out of discipline. Out of weight. Because the numbers were not abstract. Not anymore. They were final. Dar continued. Governmental structure. A pause. Status. Non-functional. No elaboration. None needed. Because everyone understood what that meant. The list continued. Sector by sector. System by system. Until there was nothing left to list. Then Dar reached the final section. He paused. Not for effect. For accuracy. Civilian evacuation, he said. The words shifted something in the room. Small, but noticeable. Approximately 400,000 individuals were removed from the system prior to final campaign phase. A pause. Evacuation conducted by a VT Kai citizen operating independently. Dar glanced down briefly, then continued. Those individuals are alive. Silence. Different this time. Not heavy. Not crushing. Just still. Because that was the only deviation. The only line. That did not end the same way. Dar finished the report. Closed the data slate. Then, for the first time, he looked up. At the chamber. At the delegates. At the empty seat. The VT Kai, he said. As a functioning civilization. A pause. No longer exists. The words settled. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just there. And no one challenged them. Because no one could. Dar inclined his head slightly. Report concluded. Then stepped back. No flourish. No waiting. No expectation of response. He left the podium. And returned to his seat. The chamber did not move. Did not speak. Did not react. Because there was nothing to respond with. No counterargument. No correction. No reinterpretation. Only acceptance. Because this was no longer a situation. It was a result. And results do not negotiate. At the far end of the chamber, Elder Sohan remained still. Watching. Processing. Not the numbers. Those were simple. Clear. Complete. But the pattern. The confirmation. Because now, it was no longer theoretical. No longer historical. No longer something buried in a file. It had happened. Again. And the outcome had not changed. Not in scale. Not in method. Not in finality. Sohan shifted slightly. A small movement. Almost imperceptible. But inside. Something had settled. A conclusion. One that would not be spoken. But would not be forgotten. Because the most dangerous force in any system is not the one that threatens. Not the one that reacts. Not even the one that wins. It is the one that finishes. And does not stop. Until there is nothing left to continue. The chamber remained silent for a long time after the report ended. Not out of protocol. Not out of respect. But because every species present was thinking the same thing. And none of them were willing to say it first. For a long moment after the report, no one spoke. The chamber remained suspended in a silence that no protocol had prepared for. It wasn't shock. That had passed. It wasn't confusion. The facts were clear. It was something else. Something heavier. Because now, there was nothing left to debate. Only one thing left. To understand. Ambassador Yoel Okafor stood. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just as she had before. Deliberately. She walked to the central podium. No one stopped her. No one questioned it. Because at this point, no one in that room was in a position to deny her anything. She placed her materials down. Looked out across the chamber. At the 17 species. At the empty space. Where one had been. Then. She spoke. We did not begin with this outcome. Her voice was calm. Even. No trace of pride. No trace of regret. Just. Statement. We requested the return of our people. A pause. We asked for a tribunal. Another. We allowed time. Her eyes moved slowly across the room. You chose not to act. No accusation. No emphasis. Because it didn't need it. Everyone there knew what had been offered and what had been refused. We acted under our legal right, she continued, after the compact failed to meet its own obligations. Another pause. Then, she reached down and activated a secondary file. A list appeared in front of her. She did not look at it. She didn't need to. She began to read. One name. Then another. Then another. 55 in total. Each one. Given space. Given weight. Given existence. Inside a room that had chosen not to protect them. No one interrupted. No one shifted. Because now, they understood why this part mattered. When she finished, she closed the file. Looked up again. We did not take pleasure in this, she said. A pause. We took necessary action. The words landed quietly, but they did not soften anything. They clarified it. There is a difference, she added. Another pause. And it matters to us. Silence. Because that was the line. The separation between what had been done and how it would be remembered. She gathered her materials, prepared to step away. And then, a voice. Soft. Measured. Ancient. Ambassador. Elder Sowen. All eyes turned. Because that was not something the elder did lightly. Not without purpose. Not without necessity. Okafor paused. Turned slightly. Met the elder's gaze. Yes. Sowen shifted within the enclosure. Not physically large, but in presence. Because when something that old spoke, it carried weight. I have one question, Sowen said. A pause. Not for effect, but because the words mattered. Was it necessary? The chamber went still. Completely. Because that was the question. Not about law. Not about process. Not about justification. About choice. About limits. About the line between response and destruction. There were civilians, Sowen continued. Quietly. Individuals who did not decide this. A slight movement. Was all of it required? No accusation. No judgment. Just understanding. Or the attempt at it. Okafor did not answer immediately. Not because she didn't have one, but because this answer was not for the room. It was for something deeper. Something that did not change, based on who was listening. Finally, she spoke. We left 400,000 alive. The number settled. Different from the others. Not destruction. Deviation. We knew they were being evacuated, she said. A pause. We allowed it. Silence. Because that changed something. Not the outcome, but the shape of it. Then, she added, with the Mora. A brief pause. We left none. The words landed, heavier than anything before, because now, there was comparison, context, and something else. Progress. A long moment passed. Then, Okafor said, we are improving. No emotion. No justification. No explanation. Just statement. And in that statement, something settled over the chamber. Not relief. Not acceptance. Something colder. Because improvement implied direction. And direction implied continuation. She inclined her head slightly, then turned and walked away. For the last time. No one stopped her. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to ask. Nothing left to argue. Nothing left to change. At the far end of the chamber, Elder Sowen remained still, watching her leave, and for a long time, did not move. Because the answer had not brought clarity, it had brought something else. Something deeper. Something more difficult to accept. That this was not an exception. Not an anomaly. Not even a reaction. It was a pattern. And patterns repeat unless something stops them. And looking around that chamber, at the silence, at the absence, at the understanding, Sowen realized nothing here would. The chamber did not recover quickly, even after the session was formally adjourned, even after the moderator called for recess, even after the lights dimmed slightly to signal the end of official proceedings. No one left immediately. They remained where they were, seated, silent, processing, because what had just been said, what had just been confirmed, could not be filed, could not be categorized, could not be reduced to something manageable. Not anymore. Eventually, movement returned. Slow, careful, measured. Delegates began speaking in low tones to their aides. Private channels opened. Encrypted lines activated. Not to discuss what had happened. That part was already understood. But to discuss something else. Implications. Because this was not contained. It did not end with the VT Chi. It extended outward, into every system, every agreement, every unresolved tension, every past decision, that might now be remembered. A delegation from a mid-tier trade coalition initiated a priority transmission. Review all active disputes with human-aligned systems. Another followed. Reassess prior refusals of human diplomatic requests. A third, more direct. Establish immediate goodwill contact. Across the chamber, similar conversations unfolded. Quiet, urgent. Because now, the galaxy understood something it had not understood before. Not fully, not clearly, not until now. That humanity did not escalate, did not posture, did not react in the ways they expected. Humanity waited, decided, and then acted completely. At the far end of the chamber, Elder Sowen remained alone. The others had left. The aides had withdrawn. The noise had faded, leaving only the quiet hum of the station systems and the empty seat where the VT Chi had once been. Sowen looked at it for a long time, not because it was important, but because it was final. A space that would not be filled again. Not by them. Not by anyone. Because the absence itself was the message. Slowly, Sowen reached toward the terminal again. Not to search. Not to confirm. But to revisit. The file. The Mora incident. They opened it. Scrolled to the end. Read the final line again. Species status. Functionally extinct. A pause. Then, they closed it. Because they no longer needed it. The pattern had been repeated. The result confirmed. Across the station. Elsewhere. In a quiet administrative office. An aide reviewed incoming communications addressed to the human delegation. Messages marked urgent. Priority. Immediate. Requests for dialogue. Offers of cooperation. Statements of respect. One message stood out. From a civilization that had publicly dismissed humanity during the original council session. We wish to express our deep respect for humanity's commitment to justice and stability. The aide read it once. Then, set it aside. Unanswered. Because there was no longer any need to respond. Outside the station. Far beyond its orbit. The stars remained unchanged. Cold. Distant. Indifferent. They had watched civilizations rise. Watched them fall. Watched conflicts begin. And end. Without ever caring which side had been right. Or wrong. Or justified. They simply remained. As they always would. But the space between them, that had changed. Subtly, permanently, because now, there was knowledge. Shared, understood, unspoken, but absolute. That somewhere in the galaxy, there existed a species that would endure, that could be provoked, that could be hurt, that could be underestimated. But once a line was crossed, would not stop, not at balance, not at victory, not at negotiation, only at completion. On a distant station, 60 light-years away, Ku sat in a small observation room overlooking a crowded refugee sector. 400,000 survivors. What remained? They moved slowly, disoriented, trying to understand what had happened to them, what had happened to everything they had ever known. Ku watched them in silence, because there were no explanations that would make sense. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He thought about the file, about the warning, about the moment. It could have been different. Then, he looked out at the stars. The same stars. Unchanged. And for the first time, he understood. The final line. Not as data, not as history, but as truth. A message. Not sent loudly, not broadcast, but delivered. Completely. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say, only something left to remember. And far beyond him, far beyond the station, far beyond the reach of any observer, human fleets slowed, not stopped, just completed, because the objective had been achieved. The system was empty, the threat was gone, the process was finished. And somewhere, in a place no one else would ever see, a final notation was entered into a record. Simple, clinical, permanent, warning delivered. And this time, there would be no one left to ignore it.